Welcome to the TDS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello and welcome to TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and my guest, Cheryl Hadland. And today we're going to be talking to Cheryl about climate action plans. And Cheryl's going to be sharing what they are, what she knows about them, and what requirements and advice she might have for settings who want to achieve best practice. So welcome, Cheryl.
Hi, Alistair.
Probably a good place to start is, if you don't already know, what is a climate action plan?
Well, I mean, you all know what action plans are, don't you? So actually, all we're talking about is something that addresses climate in your particular area. So it might be something that's very relevant for you. I mean, right now, I had to drive through a flood to get to one of my nurseries this morning. So obviously, flooding is something we're all talking about. So you'd say, okay, well, what's the most relevant thing to my setting, whether it's a school or a nursery or a childminder, and then have a look at what is it we could do to help with that particular aspect, if anything. So for flooding, for example, you might think, well, what is causing flooding in my area? You know, is there anything I can do about increasing the amount of land I've got that hasn't got plastic grass on it, for example? So, I mean, first of all, sort out what area it is that you could be passionate about or you're interested in, because nobody expects you to have an action for every single little thing to do with sustainability, just the bits that are relevant to you. And the exact style of your action plan can just fit whatever action plans you've got already. You don't need to do something, special for the Department for Education, just for them. They don't expect that. So it might be that your action plans follow a SMART profile where you're addressing each of those things, or it might be that you're using intent, implementation and impact a la Ofsted, or you might use sustainability like environment, society, financial and governance to structure your action plan. Or you might use some other format. For example, there's the Dixon in his new book on sustainable leadership. He uses captaincy, curriculum, campus, community, and I always add coaching to that list because I think one of the most important things is to coach ourselves and our colleagues and learn more about whichever area it is we're concerned about. So, I mean, your average nursery practitioner, head teacher, manager doesn't know about flooding, do we? I mean, why would we know? Because it's a relatively new subject. But fortunately, we have each other, we have the internet, we have the local authority. Let's talk about what can we do between us to help with flooding. What is it? Can we plant more trees? Because we know trees suck up water. Is there an issue with our drainage? Are we using too much water? Are we blocking our water drains because somebody's flushing down plastic wet wipes and blocking things? Is that what's causing some of our flooding? Do we have too much plastic rubbish washing off our nurseries into the drains? Can we do a litter clearance? And all of those things can go on your action plan if you want it to.
So a climate action plan starts with the setting.
Yeah, I would think so. And the risks. What are the risks to your setting? And if you feel that there are no risks, you could look at your passions. But I think let's look at the risks a bit more. I mean, the risks to us at the moment would include high energy bills, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
The utilities right now have gone up 100, 200, 300%. So that would be part of our action plan. How can we cut our energy bills?
Yeah. And how then do you envisage that feeds down into the kind of teaching with children? With
the children, exactly. So, for example, if you're losing a lot of energy out of your door when you've got the door open for free flow into the garden, you could put on your action plan, well, we're going to find out ways of stopping our warm air escaping out. That might be butcher sheets.
Yeah.
for example. So if you haven't already got butcher sheets on your doors, maybe that's something that you could put on. It could be something much more significant capital-wise, like solar panels. If we got solar panels, well, solar panels take 8 years, 10 years to cover their own costs. So that's not something that you can say, okay, we're going to do that this year. You might want
for next year.
it might be next year, it might be 5 years' time, it might be 10 years' time. And I think that's really important, that the climate action plans are not something that you do in today. You could do some of it over 10 years. And if you look at the DFE, they're not even going to try and be net zero, or they don't aim to complete being net zero till 2050. Well, for me, that's totally outrageous. We do need to be making steps right now, because our electricity bills are hitting our doorsteps right now. We can't be waiting years and years and years to do things. And there are lots of little things we can do right now, like changing our light bulbs for LEDs if you haven't already done it. Like looking at shade in our gardens, and inside. So can we have an alternative to paying for expensive air conditioning or heating? We need to look at shade. We need to look at insulation, because we know that those things can bring down the heat to the temperatures very quickly. And it may be that heat's your problem. It may be cold's your problem. It might be the utility bills are your problem. You need to pick the one that's the worst for you, and start working on that. And is it worse for you in terms of impact in your classroom, or worse on you in terms of impact on your bills? Depends really what your position is within your organisation.
Yeah. And again, it's a plan, isn't it? So I think a lot of people will listen thinking, well, our bills as a nursery are huge, but we haven't got and we probably need to be insulated, but we haven't got the funding at the moment to do what we need to do. So partly it's about identifying the issue, and then maybe somebody not necessarily listen to this, but pursuing grants, funding, things that may well be available, or building that into the longer term plan for your setting that says, I acknowledge that environmentally, heat loss, for example, is an issue for us. And so therefore we are going to put it on our plan to do something about it.
Exactly. And don't forget to put the stuff on that you're currently working on, because then you can show you've succeeded at stuff as well. And you can share that with parents and governors and directors and Ofsted. And Ofsted are already beginning to comment on setting sustainability, to my amazement. Even though it's not part of the EYFS in England, as it is in Scotland and Wales, they are still already beginning to comment, that we're taking care of our environment by doing X, Y, whether it is removing plastic grass and replacing it with natural grass, if that's possible, or we're planting a tree or bushes, or we're working with parents.
And the grass one's an interesting one, because it's real grass is a relatively cheap and simple thing to do, and it has so many benefits, even around water retention, but also just around the fact it's real and it's natural and it's habitat, and lets flowers grow and all that kind of good stuff. But I think the thing that gets in the way of natural grass in settings is that when it gets wet, it gets muddy. And therefore,
children's feet.
Yeah. But again, from my point of view, is that if we are wanting children to be explorers of the world, as well as preservers and curators of the world, then getting muddy knees and muddy feet is a massive learning opportunity. The issue with it is those muddy feet then inevitably come back in on the carpet, and somebody
welly boots.
Goes mad.
Yeah.
But it's kind of about systems. It's about exactly what you're talking about. Coaching children through, if you want to go out, this is what you need. Because I am completely with you in that more and more and more settings that I go to visit, when you go to their outdoor spaces, are often rubberized surface followed by AstroTurf. And there's very little space for anything to grow and be. And then you end up introducing a kind of a pallet turned into a bug hotel, because there aren't habitats within your space where bugs could naturally inhabit.
Indeed, and we're not helping the flooding situation. When it rains, what's happening to that water? Where is it flooding? Is it going to then flood your back door, and then you've got a pond in your back garden? Never mind a mud bath. Yeah. There are ways around it. I mean, for example, in Australia, they still have grass in some of the nursery gardens, but they use a different type of grass to cope with the very dry conditions.
Yeah.
Here, where you might be in a low floodplain, you can put this matting and then plant your grass through the matting, and that protects the roots so that it doesn't turn into mud. Now, I have to say that if you go around my nurseries right now, not many of them have that now, but it's on the plan. That we will gradually develop the garden to be more resilient when it either floods or it's very hot. And that's kind of what we've got to think. Instead of it being kind of all much the same with hardly any snow. I mean, I'm in the south of England. We hardly have any snow, although we had it last night. But it's kind of building that resilience so that you've thought about, okay, so if it is very dry, what can we do to build in resilience? Can we put a water butt into the garden so that we can water the plants ourselves without it actually costing us any money from the water coming through the taps? And that can go on your plan.
Yeah, and I think it's just like I'm in very rainy Manchester, where it's wet a lot of the year. That's why we love it. But things like gravel paths, with pea gravel or gravel pits, as opposed to, it's a different experience to a sand pit. But the fact if you've got a gravel path, it's very resilient, lasts for a long time, allows for drainage, but also means that you're not just putting down tarmac or paving stones or things that won't allow the earth to breathe. So
and why not bare feet out there in the summer? You can have bare feet on the sand and on the grass, and then they can try the gravel. And it's such a good sensory experience for children to walk on different things barefoot.
And I mean, then bark is better than AstroTurf if your bark is sourced correctly and it's the right sort of bark
and topped up. You've got to top that bark up because it does mulch down, which is fine. But if you're using bark around safety equipment, then the fall height that is safe is going to be impacted. So you have to measure how deep your bark is on a regular basis and then top it up from your local eco supplier. Again, onto the action plan, write it all down, and then every year or every X months, depending on where you are, you measure it, order some more top up.
And you can also, most local authorities will have a local authority tree surgeon, or you will have a local tree surgeon, much in the same way that you can go and tap your local florist up for any leftover flowers. I've worked with loads of different settings that have just hooked in with a tree surgeon who will drop off various bits of logs, or again, you've got to be careful what's coming in. But all of those things that you can help to make your setting more robust in an outdoor space rather than just having this kind of flat space. But they will take things away as well as kind of bring them in. And I think it's that long-term view of it might be a little bit more expensive in the short term, but actually long-term, you're going to get a lot of value out of it and it's going to solve some problems for you.
It could be cheaper. If you develop a good partnership with your local tree surgeon, do you know what all your parents, your children's parents do? Because it's well worth working with them, because often they'd love to help. We're just not asking them.
Yeah. And it is that opportunity. And also sometimes they just need to be told what it is that you are looking for.
Indeed.
And then how you can use that in your space. And again, it's just about that, not always what's easiest. If we're thinking about opportunities for learning for children, and often learning equates to mess in the eyes of an adult, because if you explore anything, then often you want to take it apart, put it back together, mush it up, feel it, touch it, move it. And so therefore we shouldn't be surprised that early years children want to do that, because that's how they're demonstrating their ability to learn. So rather than trying to get children to conform to spaces that don't meet that requirement, we need to think, as we do, about creating spaces that meet the needs of children or maximize the needs of children. And that engagement with the natural world, we know, has a hugely positive impact on adults and children's mental health. And not just being out in the wind and the rain and the sun, but touching grass and turning over stones and feeling the weight and smelling the mud and getting all the little, micro
bacteria good things. For you.
Yeah, that you're kind of ingesting that are good for you. All of that is really good for our physical, mental well-being. So it's more than just a neat and tidy space. It's about really providing some foundations for children's learning.
Indeed. And I think, that point about the natural dirt is so important. A lot of nurseries and schools will spray their tables with anti-bac chemicals. Now that anti-bac stuff, if a child's then playing and then putting their hands in their mouth, which they inevitably do, that anti-bac's ending up in their stomach and causing all kinds of problems, increased allergies, and intolerances that we could, really do without. Let them play in the mud. Yes, wash their hands when they come in. But I guess that leads on to the food that we give our children, because we can put on our action plan, for example, that we'll give our children 1 meat-free day, 2 meat-free days, 4 meat-free days. And that can be a progression. I know when we first introduced a meat-free day, it was meat-free Monday. Quite a few parents stopped their child coming in on a Monday because they wanted their child to eat on a Tuesday. They wanted their child to have meat every day. But that's not the case anymore. I mean, that was 10 years ago. So gradually over the years, A, we don't tell them which day is meat-free, and B, actually every day our children can eat meat-free. And A, it's cheaper to not eat meat, and B, it's so much better for the environment, far more sustainable and much lower carbon footprint. But it is a progression. I do find parents want choices. So this would be something that would go on your action plan that you might spread over a number of years. You might decide that actually dropping fish on a Friday would be a good idea. We've done that because we don't have to eat fish in this country. There are lots of alternatives that are just as healthy. Whereas if you live, in a Fijian island, actually fish is your staple food, and us eating their fish is really not helping. And there are 80% less fish in the sea now. So do we really have to eat fish every week?
If we can demonstrate that children have a varied, balanced diet that's giving them everything they need, and also, as educators in the broader sense, we are also educating their experience of food and their diverse palate. So there is something to be said about parents making the choice that parents will make at home, but also settings being able to give a good, healthy, balanced diet, but also broaden children's horizons a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember our parents were pretty upset when we stopped having sugary biscuits with break time, and instead of that, we were offering fruits and vegetables. And they, originally they were quite, well, I don't think that's right. And I would say, well, do you know what? When your child's at nursery, they'll have a completely clean diet. We're not going to use any added sugar. We're not going to use any preservatives. We're going to try and use organic produce as much as we can. What you feed them for the other, 20 hours or 28 hours, a week or whatever. I mean, it's actually a lot of hours. If we only have your child for 20 hours, it's like 100 hours. You can feed them whatever you like. But we would encourage their palate to learn about eating fruits and vegetables, and some different fruits and vegetables. We can also introduce perhaps things from other cultures into the diet that we're just not used to in the English diet, whether that's quinoa or lentils or, soya products. Those things are all great for children. And the first time they eat it, they might not like it. They'll want to touch it and feel it and smell it. And that's great. Because we never make a child eat everything. Obviously, we'd encourage them to try it. But I think once you put it on the table several times and their friends are eating it, it's, it helps with that diversity, the more variety of fruits and vegetables that we can encourage our children to eat, the healthier they're likely to be.
And we can also talk about what's seasonal and what's sustainable, and all of those messages can be underpinned just with a snack. Indeed. And on that note, feeling slightly hungry now. That brings us to the end of that episode. Thank you so much, Cheryl. That has given, I think, me and lots of our listeners quite a lot to think about, and certainly worth investing some time and thought and maybe a little bit of Google searching into a climate action plan, and maybe putting one in place for your setting. And as Cheryl said, it's not necessarily a do tomorrow. It's a plan for how you're going to be sustainable as a setting in the future. So thank you very much, Cheryl.
It can just be a few lines in your current action plan, a couple of things that you're going to do for the climate and for your children's health.
Great. Thank you. So all it leaves for me to do is to say a huge thank you to our guest, Cheryl, for joining us and providing such valuable insights and ideas all around sustainability in the early years. So you've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and with Cheryl Hadland. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes, and then you'll be the first to hear about future episodes. But also, doing that, you can access some exclusive follow-up content, and that includes things like ideas for your setting, Pinterest boards that will help you to shop for resources that are all linked to sustainability and sustainable practices within the early years.